Hello everyone! From the last session, we've got to know that architecture is a form of social art, and architectural styles classify architecture in terms of its form, material, region, time period, and other stylistic influences. So the major styles of Western architecture are going to be discussed in this session. We're going to start with ancient Greek architecture. The most notable feature of this ancient style was definitely the Great Column, which had three major types. The first was the Doric column, which was the oldest and the plainest. The whole design of it was very powerful looking, representing the charm of male. In ancient Greek, Doric columns worked quite well with grand rectangular architecture. The second basic type was Ionic column. Compared to the Doric column, this one was slenderer and more decorative, representing the beauty of female. It was featured by a pair of scroll at the top, which looked like the wavy hair of a lady. The most eye-catching type of the three was the Corinthian column. It was featured by a decorative top which had flowers and leaves below a small scroll. The column was much slenderer than the previous two. Later, ancient Roman architecture had borrowed heavily from Greek architecture, especially the Corinthian order, perhaps due to its slender properties. But soon the Romans tried to adopt their own styles, for instance, the use of concrete and the use of bricks and marbles. The buildings looked more imposing and well-engineered with a design of arch and dome. Roman Colosseum was considered as one of the greatest works of ancient Roman architecture in the Roman engineering. It was used for gladiator fights, chariot races, public executions, and other events.
The Colosseum is an entirely freestanding structure, deriving its basic structure from two Roman theaters standing back to back. The outer wall is estimated to have required over 3.5 million cubic feet of travertine stone, which were set without mortar. They were held together by 300 tons of iron clamps. The ordered beauty and formal regularity of the Colosseum's exterior is created by 3 stories of superimposed arches, filled with painted statues of emperors and gods. Columns on each story climb the walls: Tuscan, Ionic, and Corinthian. The fourth higher blind story is punctuated by pilasters.
Viewed from the outside, the great amphitheater was as tall as a building of 12 to 15 floors. And arrangements of seats inside were designed with strict classification of Roman society. So the emperor could sit in special boxes on the first floor. The second floor was occupied by the nobles and knights. The third floor was reserved for ordinary Roman citizens. The attic on the top floor was for the poor, slaves, and women. It is amazing that the Colosseum could hold 50,000 to 8,000 people with more than 100 exits, that all the audience could leave the building within only 10 minutes. This model is still followed by modern stadiums. In the late medieval period, Gothic architecture was flowering. Verticality and height were emphasized in Gothic architectures. They were featured with huge windows, high arched doors, flying buttresses, draped vaulting, clustered columns, and sharply pointed spires.
Helping to disperse the weight carried by the pointed arches was the flying buttress, and something that gives Gothic architecture its unique silhouette. While a regular buttress butted up against the wall and kind of blended in with the masonry, a flying buttress was much more elegant and much more obvious. You see them mostly on the outside of the building as they move the lateral forces across one or more arches. Despite supporting so much weight, the flying buttress disguises the load with an almost magical design. When you combine the flying buttress, pointed arch, slender columns, and ribbed vaulting, you get buildings that looked unlike anything seen before. You have a building that's no longer supported by walls and has a more open interior environment. With the weight of the building taken off the walls, you also have an opportunity to fill them with something other than brick and mortar, resulting in those large windows of stained glass that help define Gothic cathedrals.
Such advances in design allow cathedrals to rise taller than ever before, and it was even competitive to build a church as high as possible. The various elements of Gothic architecture emerged in the 11th and 12th centuries, particularly in France. One of the earliest Gothic buildings was Abbey Church of Saint Denis near Paris, built between 1140 and 1144. Apart from being vertical, the stained glass window was another notable feature. The selected colored glass was cut into desired size and shape according to the story it told. Structurally, these windows provided great illumination. Symbolically, the window was regarded to pass the light from heaven. In these transparent glasses, biblical stories and the saint lives were vividly portrayed for the believers to appreciate. Many of these large windows have withstood the test of time and remained basically intact since the late Middle Ages. Tourists today can still appreciate their beauty as fresh as they were created. Stylistically, Renaissance architecture had followed Gothic architecture and was succeeded by Baroque architecture.
Imagine this. It's 1418 in Florence, Italy. You've been challenged to build a great dome for the Santa Maria del Fiore, one of the grandest cathedrals ever built. And you have no formal architectural training. No pressure, right? For Filippo Brunelleschi, a goldsmith and clockmaker, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He considered the challenge carefully. Then proposed a daring plan using methods that experts don't fully understand even to this day. However it was done, it worked. The 8 faces of the dome met at the top precisely, just as Brunelleschi had planned. In all, it took 16 years to complete the dome.
Influenced by Greek and Roman architecture, arches and domes were extremely popular, and Roman-type columns were largely used. The ceilings of buildings were generally flat, which were often left open in the Middle Ages. Many buildings were built as square or rectangle shapes. Among all of them, Basilica of St. Peter was considered as one of the most famous ones during the Renaissance. It took 120 years to complete from 1506 to 1626. It had the largest interior of any Christian church in the world. Palazzo Pitti was originally built in 1458 for Florence banker Luca Pitti, and later became part of the Medici family empire. Another masterpiece was the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City, which was remarkable for its ceilings painted by Michelangelo. Baroque architecture sounds exotic to the ear, doesn't it? If you take a walk around the Palace of Versailles, you may feel this typical Baroque style was bold and unstringed, heavy colored and superabundant in decoration, imposing, and even showy.
Versailles wasn't built in a day. It all began in 1629, when King Louis XIII had a hunting lodge built, replaced sometime later by a stone and brick chateau. King Louis XIV inherited this small chateau. In 1666, the sovereign embarked on major building work. Over 50 years, he continued to extend and transform what became Europe's largest chateau, the Palace of Versailles. Mansart further extended the palace to accommodate the royal family, the court, and all the government departments. With the servants, the kitchen, and stable staff, close to 10,000 people were bustling about the palace. At the end of his reign, Louis XIV moved his bedchamber to the center of the palace. This room was the hub of the king's daily ceremonial routine and that of all the Versailles courtiers.
Clearly constructed to the medieval architecture, which tried to arouse people's desire for the heaven, Baroque architecture tried to pull people down to the earth. But why Baroque architecture became popular in that period of time? It was closely related to the social changes. In the 600s, the Renaissance was drawing to a close. New political and spiritual ideas were emerging. The architects began to seek innovation and started to make bold and curving buildings with ornate decorations. This requirement was fulfilled by the rise of European colonialism, the new wealth that helped architectural industry and arts. At the same time, the extravagant buildings helped to stay the wealth and the power of the colonist country. Rococo architecture was a late version of Baroque style. The color of the Rococo buildings used was inspired by the color of rocks and shells. Most of them were pale and light ones, although lots of gold was also being used. Even though there were many similarities between Baroque and Rococo styles, the latter tended to be much softer and more graceful, with feminine curves and intricate designs. The delicacy and the playfulness of Rococo designs also influenced other forms of art at that time. For instance, in painting, painters would use delicate colors and curving forms. In sculpture, sculptors would express their feelings through delicate porcelain sculptures rather than imposing marble statues. In costume, intricate designs with lace details were widely used in both male and female outfits. Till now, you may get familiar with the major styles of Western architecture, especially from ancient Greek style to Rococo style. The architectural and aesthetic development of these buildings is worth analyzing and further exploring. As usual, 2 questions for your better understanding of this session. Question number 1. What are the major features of Gothic architecture? Well, Gothic architecture is characterized by architectural elements that allow great heights, pointed arches, pointed spires, raised vaulting, and flying buttresses. In a word, verticality is highly valued, and colorful stained glass is remarkable. Question number 2. What is the relationship between Baroque architecture and Rococo architecture? In short, Rococo architecture is a late version of Baroque style. The former is tenderer and softer, while the latter is more lavish and imposing.